The morning sun cast long shadows across Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as Colonel Marcus Hendricks adjusted his uniform and checked his watch for the third time. Today was supposed to be routine, just another demonstration flight for the visiting defense contractors who were considering the base's pilot training capabilities. He had specifically requested their best F-16 pilot for this showcase, someone who could make the fighter jet dance through the sky like poetry in motion. Standing beside the flight line, Hendricks surveyed the pristine aircraft lined up in perfect formation. The contractors from Lockheed Martin and Boeing were due to arrive within the hour, and everything had to be flawless. His reputation, and possibly his next promotion, depended on this demonstration going smoothly. The base had been competing for a lucrative contract to train international pilots, and today's performance could seal the deal. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been his obvious choice. With over 2,000 flight hours and a spotless record, she was exactly what they needed to impress the suits. But 20 minutes ago, his aide had delivered devastating news. Mitchell was grounded. With food poisoning from the base cafeteria's questionable seafood special, the backup pilot was away on emergency leave, and the third option had called in sick that morning. Panic crept into Hendricks' chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. The contractors had flown in from 3 different states specifically for this demonstration. Canceling now would not only be embarrassing, but could cost the base millions in potential contracts. He needed a pilot, and he needed one fast. That's when Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez appeared on his radar. She had been walking past the flight line, helmet tucked under her arm, returning from what appeared to be a maintenance check flight. Hendricks barely knew her. She was relatively new to the base, having transferred in just 6 months ago. Her file showed solid credentials, but nothing spectacular. Still, she was qualified, available, and most importantly, she was here. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," he called out, his voice carrying the urgency he felt. She snapped to attention immediately, her dark eyes alert and focused. "I need a pilot for the contractor demonstration in 45 minutes. Our scheduled pilot is sick, and you're the only qualified aviator I have available right now." Rodriguez straightened her shoulders. "What aircraft will I be flying, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the short notice. Hendricks felt a wave of relief wash over him. At least she wasn't making excuses or showing signs of nervousness about the last-minute assignment.
"F-16C standard aerobatic routine," he replied quickly. "Nothing too fancy, just show them what our pilots can do. Clean takeoff, some basic maneuvers, maybe a few high G turns to demonstrate our training standards. The contractors want to see precision and professionalism."
Rodriguez nodded without hesitation. "Understood, sir. I'll need 15 minutes to review the flight plan and conduct my pre-flight inspection." Her confidence was reassuring, though Hendricks couldn't shake the feeling that he was rolling the dice on this one. As she turned to head toward the aircraft, Hendricks called after her with words he would soon regret. "Lieutenant, any jet will do. Just make us look good out there." It was meant to be encouraging, a way to ease any pressure she might feel about the specific aircraft assignment. He wanted her to know that he trusted her judgment and flying skills regardless of which particular F-16 she chose to fly. Rodriguez paused and looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes, not defiance exactly, but a quiet determination that made him momentarily wonder about her background. She had been unusually quiet during her time at the base, keeping to herself and focusing entirely on her duties. He realized he knew virtually nothing about her previous assignments or specializations. "Copy that, sir." "Any jet will do," she repeated, and something in the way she said it made his stomach tighten slightly. But there was no time for second thoughts now. The contractors would be arriving soon, and he needed to focus on the briefing materials and ensuring everything else was perfect for their visit. As Rodriguez walked away toward the flight line, Hendricks turned his attention back to his checklist. The weather was perfect. Clear skies with minimal wind. The ground crew was ready. The viewing area was set up with chairs and refreshments for the contractors. Everything was falling into place, despite the pilot change. He tried to push away the nagging feeling that he should have asked more questions about Rodriguez's experience. But what choice did he have? Sometimes in the military, you had to make quick decisions with limited information and trust that your people would deliver. Besides, she was a qualified pilot on an active base. How wrong could this possibly go? The sound of jet engines warming up in the distance reminded him that time was running short. Soon, Lieutenant Rodriguez would be taking to the skies to represent not just herself, but the entire training program he had worked years to build. He could only hope that his faith in her abilities wasn't misplaced, and that his casual words about "any jet will do" wouldn't come back to haunt him. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez walked purposefully toward the flight line, her mind already shifting into mission mode. Colonel Hendricks' words echoed in her head. Any jet will do. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. For the past 6 months, she had been quietly flying F-16s and keeping her mouth shut about her previous assignment. But today that was about to change. Rodriguez wasn't just any pilot, she was a former A-10, Thunderbolt II specialist with over 1,500 hours in the legendary Warthog. She had spent 3 years flying close air support missions, learning to make the heavily armored attack aircraft dance through hostile airspace, like a ballet dancer with fangs. When budget cuts forced her squadron to disband, she had been reassigned to Davis-Monthan and retrained on F-16s, but her heart had never left the cockpit of the A-10. As she approached the F-16 assigned for the demonstration, Rodriguez paused and looked down the flight line. There, sitting like a patient predator among the sleek fighters, was her old love, an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft looked exactly like the ones she used to fly. Gray-green camouflage, twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, and that distinctive straight-wing design that made it look more like a flying tank than a graceful fighter jet. The maintenance chief, Sergeant First Class Williams, was completing his inspection of the A-10 when he noticed her approaching. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, haven't seen you around this bird in a while. She's all ready to go if anyone needs her." Williams had been one of the few people who knew about her A-10 background, having worked on her previous aircraft. Rodriguez felt a familiar thrill run through her as she looked at the A-10's cockpit. The colonel had said any jet would do, and technically the A-10 was still a combat aircraft capable of demonstration flights. It wasn't what he had intended, but it wasn't against his direct orders either. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth as she made a decision that would change everything. "Williams, is she fully fueled and ready for flight?" she asked, running her hand along the A-10's armored side. The aircraft felt solid and reassuring under her touch, like greeting an old friend after a long separation. "Yes, ma'am. Fully loaded with fuel, all systems green. She's been sitting here ready for action, but nobody's been qualified to take her up lately." Williams looked puzzled. "But aren't you supposed to be flying the F-16 for some big demonstration today?" Rodriguez's mind raced through the possibilities. The contractors were coming to see what the base's pilots could do. They wanted to evaluate the training program's effectiveness and versatility. What better way to demonstrate pilot adaptability than showing she could excel in multiple aircraft types? The A-10 would certainly make an impression. The question was whether it would be the right kind of impression. "Change of plans, Sergeant. I'm taking the Warthog up instead." Her voice carried a confidence that had been missing during her months of flying F-16s. This was where she belonged, in the cockpit of an aircraft designed for precision and power rather than pure speed. Williams raised an eyebrow but began preparing the A-10 for immediate departure. "Should I inform the tower about the aircraft change?" he asked, professional concern evident in his voice. "I'll handle that once I'm airborne," Rodriguez replied, already beginning her pre-flight inspection, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Every rivet, every panel, every control surface. She checked them all with the thoroughness that A-10 pilots were famous for. As she conducted her inspection, Rodriguez thought about what this demonstration could mean. The A-10 had been her life for years, but budget constraints and changing military priorities had pushed the aircraft toward retirement. Many people saw it as outdated, too slow for modern warfare. But Rodriguez knew better. She understood that the A-10's apparent limitations were actually its greatest strengths in the right situations, the aircraft's twin general. Electric engines rumbled to life with a deep, powerful sound that was completely different from the high-pitched whine of an F-16. This was the sound of controlled power, of an aircraft built to absorb punishment and keep flying. As the engines warmed up, Rodriguez felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was home. She completed her radio checks and reviewed the flight plan she would need to modify on the fly. The demonstration area was the same, but her approach would be entirely different. Instead of the high-speed, high-altitude maneuvers that F-16s were known for, she would showcase the A-10's unique capabilities, its incredible maneuverability at low speeds, its ability to fly precision patterns that would be impossible in a faster aircraft. Unknown to Rodriguez, Colonel Hendricks was at that moment greeting the contractor delegation and explaining the demonstration they were about to witness. He was confidently describing the F-16's capabilities, completely unaware that his carefully planned presentation was about to take a dramatic and unexpected turn. As Rodriguez strapped herself into the A-10's cockpit, she couldn't help but smile. Colonel Hendricks had said any jet would do, and she was about to show him and the contractors exactly what that meant. The question wasn't whether she could handle the A-10. It was whether they could handle what she was about to show them. Colonel Hendricks stood confidently beside the viewing area, gesturing toward the flight line as he addressed the 5 defense contractors who had traveled from across the country for this demonstration. The group included representatives from major aerospace companies, all potential partners in the base's new international pilot training program. Gentlemen, what you're about to witness represents the pinnacle of our pilot training capabilities, Hendricks announced, his chest swelling with pride. Lieutenant Rodriguez will be demonstrating the precision and skill that our program develops in every graduate. You'll see clean aerobatic maneuvers, high-speed passes, and the kind of technical proficiency that has made American fighter pilots legendary worldwide. The contractors nodded approvingly, their tablets and cameras ready to document the demonstration for their respective companies. Richard Blackwell from Boeing adjusted his sunglasses and commented, "Colonel, we're particularly interested in seeing how well your pilots handle stress situations and adapt to changing mission parameters. Flexibility is crucial for the international students we'd be sending here." Hendricks smiled confidently. "I guarantee you'll be impressed by Lieutenant Rodriguez's performance. She's exactly the type of pilot our program produces, skilled, adaptable, and ready for any challenge." He checked his watch and noted that the demonstration should be beginning any moment. Meanwhile, in the control tower, Air Traffic Controller Senior Airman Peters was monitoring the radio frequencies when an unexpected call came through. "Tower, this is Hawkeye 77 requesting permission for demonstration flight. A-10 Thunderbolt II, Pilot Rodriguez." Peters paused, confused. The flight plan clearly showed an F-16 demonstration with Lieutenant Rodriguez. He glanced at his supervisor, who was equally puzzled by the aircraft change. "Hawkeye 77, confirm aircraft type. We show you scheduled for F-16 demonstration flight." Rodriguez's voice came through clearly and confidently. "Tower, confirm A-10 Thunderbolt II. Aircraft change approved by demonstration commander. Requesting immediate clearance for takeoff." The supervisor quickly grabbed the radio. "Hawkeye 77, stand by while we confirm aircraft authorization." But before they could contact Colonel Hendricks, Rodriguez was already taxiing toward the active runway. Her movements were smooth and practiced, showing complete familiarity with the A-10's ground handling characteristics. Back at the viewing area, Hendricks was mid-sentence explaining the F-16's superior speed capabilities when he heard the distinctive sound of A-10 engines spooling up. The deep rumbling roar was unmistakable and completely different from the high-pitched whine of an F-16. His head snapped toward the runway, and his confident expression began to falter. "Colonel," interrupted Dr. Sarah Chen from Lockheed Martin, pointing toward the flight line, "is that the aircraft we're supposed to be watching?" Her voice carried a note of confusion as she observed the gray-green A-10 moving into position for takeoff. Hendricks felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. Through his binoculars, he could clearly see Lieutenant Rodriguez in the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, not the F-16 he had specifically discussed with her. His mind raced through possible explanations, but none of them were good. "There seems to be some kind of aircraft substitution," Hendricks managed to say. His voice strained as he tried to maintain composure in front of the contractors. "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation." The contractors exchanged glances, some amused by the obvious confusion, others concerned about the apparent lack of coordination. James Morrison from Raytheon chuckled and said, "Well, Colonel, this should be interesting. We don't often get to see A-10 demonstrations anymore. Most people consider them outdated for modern warfare. Hendricks fumbled for his radio to contact the control tower, but before he could establish communication, the A-10's engines reached full power. Rodriguez had positioned the aircraft at the end of the runway and was clearly ready for takeoff whether he approved or not. In the cockpit, Rodriguez was completely focused on the mission ahead. She had made her choice and there was no turning back now. The A-10 felt alive beneath her hands, responding to every input with the kind of solid reliability that had made the aircraft legendary among ground troops. She knew this demonstration would either vindicate her decision or end her career, but she was confident in her abilities. Tower, Hawkeye 77 ready for immediate departure, she announced, her voice steady and professional despite the chaos she knew she was probably causing on the ground. The tower, still trying to reach Colonel Hendricks for clarification, found themselves in an impossible position. The pilot was ready to fly. The aircraft was cleared for operation and the demonstration was scheduled to begin. Senior Airman Peters made a command decision. Hawkeye 77 cleared for takeoff. Wind calm. Visibility unlimited. As the A-10 began its takeoff roll, Colonel Hendricks watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with surprising speed for something that looked so heavy and ungainly. Rodriguez lifted off smoothly, retracting the landing gear as the A-10 climbed away from the field. The contractors were now fully engaged, their cameras rolling and tablets documenting what was turning into a much more interesting demonstration than anyone had anticipated. "Colonel," said Dr. Chen with obvious amusement, "you certainly weren't kidding about flexibility and adaptability. This is definitely not what we expected." Hendricks forced a weak smile while internally calculating how he was going to explain this to his commanding officer. "Lieutenant Rodriguez is very resourceful," he managed to say, watching as the A-10 disappeared into the distance to begin whatever kind of demonstration she had planned. The question now was whether Rodriguez could pull off something spectacular enough to justify her unauthorized aircraft change, or whether they were all about to witness a career-ending disaster unfold in front of some of the most important people in military aviation. Lieutenant Rodriguez banked the A-10 into a wide circle around the demonstration area, feeling the familiar weight and stability of the aircraft respond to her commands. From 3,000 feet, she could see the viewing area where Colonel Hendricks and the contractors were undoubtedly trying to figure out what had just happened. She knew she had approximately 15 minutes to either prove her point or destroy her military career. The A-10, Thunderbolt II, was never designed to be a showboat aircraft like the F-16. It was built for one primary purpose: close air support for ground troops in hostile environments. But Rodriguez knew something that most people had forgotten. In the right hands, the A-10 could demonstrate capabilities that would make even seasoned pilots take notice. She began her demonstration with a maneuver that would have been impossible in a faster aircraft. Rolling into a steep bank, she brought the A-10 around in an impossibly tight circle, using the aircraft's low stall speed and exceptional control authority to maintain a turn radius that defied expectations. The twin engines, mounted high and away from the fuselage, allowed for maneuvers that would have been dangerous or impossible in other aircraft. Down in the viewing area, the contractors were leaning forward in their chairs, clearly impressed by what they were witnessing. "I've never seen an A-10 fly like that," commented Richard Blackwell from Boeing, his camera capturing every moment. "The turn radius is incredible." Colonel Hendricks remained speechless, his radio clutched in his hand as he watched Rodriguez put the A-10 through a series of maneuvers that showcased not just her skill, but the unexpected capabilities of an aircraft many considered obsolete. Despite his anger at her unauthorized aircraft change, he couldn't deny that what she was doing was extraordinary. Rodriguez rolled the A-10 into a knife-edge pass directly over the viewing area, the aircraft's distinctive silhouette clearly visible as it flew sideways just 500 feet above the ground. The sound of the twin engines created a deep rumble that resonated in everyone's chest, a dramatic contrast to the sharp whine of supersonic fighters. "Now that's impressive," said Dr. Sarah Chen from Lockheed Martin, making notes on her tablet. "The precision control at that altitude and attitude requires exceptional pilot skill. Your Lieutenant Rodriguez clearly knows her aircraft inside and out. What the contractors didn't know was that Rodriguez was drawing on years of experience flying similar maneuvers in combat zones. The A-10's reputation for precision wasn't just marketing. It was earned through countless missions where inches mattered and pilot skill meant the difference between mission success and friendly fire incidents. For her next demonstration, Rodriguez set up for what A-10 pilots called a show of force pass. She brought the aircraft in low and fast, then pulled into a steep climb while rolling slightly to show the A-10's distinctive profile. At the top of the climb, she executed a hammerhead turn, a maneuver where the aircraft climbs vertically until it nearly stalls, then pivots around its vertical axis to head back down. The hammerhead turn was particularly impressive in an A-10 because it demonstrated the aircraft's exceptional low-speed handling characteristics. Unlike fighters that relied on speed and energy, the A-10 could perform precise maneuvers at speeds that would leave other aircraft wallowing or stalling. James Morrison from Raytheon was frantically taking notes. "Colonel, I have to ask, how many of your pilots are qualified to fly multiple aircraft types like this? The adaptability we're seeing here is exactly what our international partners are looking for." Hendricks realized that Rodriguez might actually be saving the demonstration rather than destroying it. "Lieutenant Rodriguez has diverse qualifications," he managed to say, still not entirely sure how to explain what was happening. Rodriguez wasn't finished yet. She set up for her final and most challenging maneuver, a tactical approach that A-10 pilots used in hostile environments. Coming in from the west, she flew the aircraft in a series of unpredictable jinks and turns, simulating evasive action while maintaining perfect control and heading toward a specific point on the field. The contractors watched in fascination as the A-10 seemed to dance through the sky, changing direction and altitude in ways that would have challenged any pilot. What they were witnessing was years of combat training condensed into a 5-minute display of precision flying. "This is remarkable," breathed Dr. Chen. "The pilot is demonstrating not just technical skill, but tactical awareness and adaptability. This is exactly the kind of training capability we need for our international students." As Rodriguez set up for her landing approach, Colonel Hendricks found himself caught between admiration and apprehension. She had clearly demonstrated exceptional flying skills and aircraft knowledge, but she had also completely ignored his instructions and changed aircraft without authorization. The landing would determine whether this turned into a triumph or a court-martial. The A-10 approached the runway in a stable, controlled descent that showcased the aircraft's docile landing characteristics. Unlike high-performance fighters that required precise energy management and split-second timing, the A-10 could be flown onto the runway with a margin of error that made it ideal for operations from rough or improvised airfields. Rodriguez touched down smoothly, the main gear kissing the runway with barely a puff of rubber smoke. The twin engines spooled down as she rolled out, and she turned the aircraft toward the parking area with the same precision she had shown throughout the entire demonstration. As the A-10 came to a stop and the engines wound down, the contractors burst into spontaneous applause. They had just witnessed something none of them had expected, a demonstration of pilot skill and aircraft capability that exceeded anything they had hoped to see. Colonel Hendricks stood frozen, still processing what had just happened. Lieutenant Rodriguez had defied his instructions, ignored protocol, and completely changed the nature of the demonstration. And somehow she had turned it into the most impressive flying display the base had ever hosted. The silence that followed the A-10's engine shutdown was deafening. Colonel Hendricks stood motionless, watching as Lieutenant Rodriguez began her post-flight procedures in the cockpit. Around him, the defense contractors were buzzing with excitement, their conversations filled with technical terms and enthusiastic observations about what they had just witnessed. "Colonel, that was absolutely spectacular," declared Richard Blackwell from Boeing, his eyes still fixed on the A-10. "I've been to dozens of military demonstrations, and I've never seen anything quite like that. The precision, the control, the tactical awareness. Your Lieutenant Rodriguez just demonstrated exactly what we're looking for in pilot training capabilities." Dr. Sarah Chen from Lockheed Martin was equally enthusiastic. "The way she handled that aircraft suggests she has significant experience with the A-10. That wasn't just a demonstration flight, that was a masterclass in tactical flying. How long has she been qualified on the Thunderbolt?" Hendricks felt his throat go dry. He had no idea how to answer that question because he realized he had never bothered to check Rodriguez's complete flight records. He had simply seen that she was F-16 qualified and assumed that was her primary experience. Now it was becoming clear that he had missed something significant about her background. Lieutenant Rodriguez has extensive qualifications, he managed to say, buying time while his mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. She's a very versatile pilot. James Morrison from Raytheon was making rapid notes on his tablet. Colonel, this demonstration has exceeded our expectations in ways we never anticipated. The ability to showcase multiple aircraft types, the obvious depth of tactical knowledge, the precision flying. This is exactly the kind of comprehensive training program our international partners need. As the contractors continued their animated discussion, Rodriguez shut down the A-10 systems and prepared to exit the cockpit. She could see Colonel Hendricks in the distance standing rigid beside the viewing area. Even from her position on the flight line, she could read the tension in his posture. She knew that the next few minutes would determine whether her career-defining gamble had paid off or cost her everything. The ground crew arrived to secure the aircraft, and Rodriguez climbed down from the cockpit with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the flight. Sergeant Williams approached with a huge grin on his face. "Ma'am, that was incredible," he said, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "I've been working on A-10s for 12 years, and I've never seen flying like that. You made that bird sing like it was a brand new aircraft." Rodriguez smiled briefly but kept her focus on the approaching colonel. She could see him excusing himself from the contractor group and walking toward her with determined steps. His expression was unreadable, which somehow made it more intimidating than outright anger would have been. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Hendricks called out as he approached, his voice carrying across the flight line with military authority. "A word, please," she snapped to attention immediately. "Yes, sir." Her response was crisp and professional, despite knowing that she was probably about to face the most difficult conversation of her military career. But before Hendricks could say another word, the contractor delegation approached, clearly eager to meet the pilot who had just delivered such an impressive demonstration. Dr. Chen was leading the group, her tablet still in hand and her expression one of genuine admiration. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, I presume?" Dr. Chen extended her hand with a warm smile. "That was absolutely remarkable flying. I have to ask, how long have you been qualified on the A-10 Thunderbolt?" Rodriguez glanced quickly at Colonel Hendricks, uncertain whether she should answer directly or defer to her commanding officer. Hendricks's jaw was clenched, but he nodded slightly, indicating she should respond. 3 years of active combat flying, ma'am," Rodriguez replied honestly. "I was retrained on F-16s when my squadron was deactivated, but the A-10 was my primary aircraft for most of my career." Richard Blackwell stepped forward eagerly. "Combat experience? That explains the tactical flying we just witnessed. Those weren't just aerobatic maneuvers. Those were combat techniques adapted for demonstration purposes." The contractors began peppering Rodriguez with questions about her background, her training experience, and her thoughts on pilot education programs. As she answered their questions with quiet confidence, Hendricks found himself seeing his lieutenant in an entirely new light. James Morrison was particularly interested in the training implications. "Lieutenant, in your opinion, how important is it for pilots to have experience with multiple aircraft types? What we saw today suggests that cross-training creates more adaptable aviators." Rodriguez considered her answer carefully. "Sir, I believe that different aircraft teach different skills. The A-10 taught me precision and patience. You can't rush an attack run when ground troops are depending on you. The F-16 teaches energy management and situational awareness. Each aircraft makes you a better pilot overall." Her response clearly impressed the contractors, who exchanged meaningful glances. This was exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking they wanted to see in a training program. Dr. Chen turned to Colonel Hendricks. "Colonel, we're extremely impressed with what we've seen today. The demonstration exceeded our expectations, and Lieutenant Rodriguez has shown exactly the kind of expertise and adaptability we're looking for. When can we schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the specifics of our partnership?" Hendricks felt the situation shifting beneath his feet. What had started as a potential disaster was turning into the most successful contractor meeting in his career. The defense companies were practically lining up to sign agreements based on what they had just witnessed. "I'll have my staff coordinate with your offices this week," Hendricks replied, still trying to process the rapid turn of events. "We're very pleased that our demonstration met your requirements." As the contractors began making their farewells and heading toward their vehicles, Rodriguez remained at attention, waiting for the conversation she knew was still coming. Colonel Hendricks watched the delegation depart, his mind working through everything that had just happened and everything it might mean for both their careers. The contractor vehicles disappeared into the distance, leaving Colonel Hendricks and Lieutenant Rodriguez alone on the flight line beside the now silent A-10. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, but neither of them seemed to notice the heat. The tension between them was almost visible, like waves rising from hot asphalt. Hendricks studied Rodriguez's face, searching for any sign of insubordination or smugness, but found only the same professional composure she had maintained throughout her time at the base. That somehow made the situation even more complicated. She hadn't acted out of rebellion or disrespect. She had made a calculated decision that had just saved his career. "Lieutenant," he began slowly, his voice carefully controlled. "When I said any jet will do, that was not an invitation to completely ignore the mission briefing and aircraft assignment." He paused, watching her reaction. "You took an enormous risk today. What if something had gone wrong? What if you had been unable to handle the A-10 safely?" Rodriguez maintained her attention position but met his eyes directly. "Sir, with respect, there was no risk of unsafe operation. I have over 2,500 hours in the A-10, including 400 hours of combat time. I was more qualified to fly that aircraft safely than I am to fly the F-16. Her voice remained steady, but there was an undertone of quiet conviction. Hendricks felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. "Combat time? Lieutenant, your file shows F-16 qualification and general fighter experience. Why wasn't your A-10 background more prominently featured?" For the first time, Rodriguez's professional mask slipped slightly. "Sir, when I was reassigned here after my squadron was deactivated, I was told that the A-10 was being phased out. My new squadron commander suggested that emphasizing F-16 qualifications would be better for my career advancement. The A-10 was considered outdated." Hendricks began to understand the larger picture. Rodriguez hadn't been hiding her qualifications. Out of deception, she had been advised to downplay them. Because the military was moving away from close air support aircraft like the A-10, she had been forced to reinvent herself as an F-16 pilot despite her expertise lying elsewhere. "But you could have told me about your A-10 experience when I gave you the assignment," he pointed out. "Why didn't you mention it then?" Rodriguez hesitated, then answered honestly. "Sir, you needed a pilot immediately, and you seemed satisfied with my F-16 qualifications. I didn't think my previous experience was relevant until you said any jet will do. At that point, I realized I could either give you a standard F-16 demonstration that would be adequate, or I could show you something that might actually impress the contractors." The colonel walked slowly around the A-10, running his hand along its armored fuselage. The aircraft looked exactly like what it was designed to be, a flying tank built for precision work in dangerous environments. It was the complete opposite of the sleek, fast F-16s that dominated modern air forces. "Lieutenant, what you did today was either brilliant or completely insubordinate. I'm still trying to figure out which." He stopped in front of her again. "Those contractors were more impressed with your 15-minute demonstration than they would have been with a textbook F-16 routine. You've probably just secured more training contracts for this base than we've seen in 5 years." Rodriguez remained silent, knowing that this conversation could still go either way. Success didn't always protect you from the consequences of breaking protocol. Hendricks continued. "But you also completely ignored a direct order, changed aircraft without authorization, and put me in a position where I had no idea what was happening with my own demonstration. If something had gone wrong, both of our careers would have been over." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez acknowledged. "I understand the risks I took, and I accept full responsibility for my decision. I believed that the potential benefits outweighed the risks, but I acknowledge that wasn't my call to make." The colonel studied her for a long moment, weighing military discipline against exceptional results. In his 20 years of service, he had seen plenty of pilots who followed orders perfectly and delivered mediocre performances. Rodriguez had done exactly the opposite. She had improvised, taken initiative, and delivered something extraordinary. "Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer," Hendricks said finally. "If you had it to do over again, knowing what you know now, would you make the same decision?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. The contractors got to see something they never expected, and it demonstrated capabilities they didn't know this base possessed. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve exceptional results. Hendricks nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. He paused, looking out across the flight line where F-16 sat in neat rows, all identical and predictable. Lieutenant, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm not going to write you up for insubordination, and I'm not going to put a reprimand in your file. Rodriguez felt a wave of relief, but she could sense there was more coming. In exchange, Hendricks continued, you're going to help me completely redesign this training program. If we're going to partner with these contractors, we need to offer something unique. What you showed me today is that we have pilots with diverse backgrounds and exceptional skills that we're not utilizing properly. He gestured toward the A-10. This aircraft is supposedly obsolete, but you just made it the star of the most successful contractor demonstration this base has ever hosted. That tells me we need to rethink our assumptions about what modern pilot training should look like. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. This was an opportunity she had never expected. Sir, are you saying you want to incorporate A-10 training into the program? I'm saying I want to incorporate everything, Hendricks replied. Multi-platform training, tactical flexibility, real-world experience. What you demonstrated today wasn't just flying skill. It was adaptability and creative problem-solving. That's exactly what these international partnerships need. The colonel extended his hand to Rodriguez. Welcome to your new assignment, Lieutenant. You're now my deputy program director. Your first job is to identify every pilot on this base who has skills we're not using. And your second job is to figure out how to showcase those skills to our partners. Rodriguez shook his hand, still processing the rapid change in her circumstances. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Hendricks smiled for the first time that day. Lieutenant, you've already exceeded my expectations in ways I never imagined. Just promise me one thing. Next time you decide to improvise, give me a heads up first. 6 months later, Colonel Hendricks stood in the same spot on the flight line, but everything around him had changed dramatically. Where once there had been neat rows of identical F-16s, the base now hosted a diverse collection of aircraft, representing the most comprehensive multi-platform training program in the United States Air Force. The transformation had been remarkable. Within weeks of the contractor demonstration, Rodriguez had identified 12 pilots on the base with specialized backgrounds that had been overlooked or underutilized. There was Captain Martinez, a former helicopter pilot who brought close air support expertise, Major Thompson, who had flown cargo aircraft and understood logistical operations, and Lieutenant Davis, a former Navy pilot who brought carrier operations knowledge to the program. Today's demonstration was for a delegation of international Air Force commanders considering the expanded training program. Instead of hoping one pilot could impress visitors with a single aircraft, Hendricks now had teams of specialists showcasing capabilities that no other training facility could match. Rodriguez approached him, now wearing the insignia of a newly promoted captain. Her transformation from quiet, underutilized pilot to dynamic program director had been as dramatic as the base's evolution. She carried herself with a confidence that came from being recognized for her true abilities rather than being forced into an ill-fitting role. Sir, the international delegation has arrived and completed their briefing, she reported. We're ready to begin the multi-platform demonstration whenever you give the word. Hendricks smiled, remembering his anxiety from 6 months ago when he had been desperate for any qualified pilot. Now he had more expertise than he knew what to do with, and training requests were backing up for months in advance. The demonstration began with Captain Martinez in an A-10, showcasing the precision close air support techniques that had made Rodriguez's original performance so impressive. But instead of flying alone, Martinez was coordinating with Lieutenant Davis in an F-16, demonstrating joint operations capabilities that reflected real-world combat scenarios. The international commanders watched with obvious interest as the two aircraft worked together, the A-10 providing detailed ground reconnaissance while the F-16 maintained high-altitude overwatch. This wasn't just individual pilot skill. It was coordinated tactical operations that prepared pilots for the complex realities of modern warfare. Colonel Hendricks, commented General Silva from the Brazilian Air Force, this level of integrated training is exactly what our pilots need. Most programs focus on single-platform expertise, but real operations require this kind of coordination between different aircraft types. The demonstration continued with Major Thompson in a C-130 transport aircraft, showing how cargo operations integrated with fighter support. The scenario played out like a real-world mission, with each aircraft type contributing its specialized capabilities to achieve a common objective. Rodriguez coordinated the entire demonstration from the ground, her radio communications smooth and professional as she managed multiple aircraft and ensured seamless transitions between different phases of the exercise. Watching her work, Hendricks reflected on how much she had grown into her new role. "Captain Rodriguez," he said during a brief pause in the action, "I have to ask, do you ever miss just being a pilot instead of running this entire program?" Rodriguez grinned and gestured toward the sky where 3 different aircraft types were executing a complex formation routine. "Sir, I get to fly every aircraft in the inventory now. Yesterday I was in the A-10, today I'm scheduled for F-16 time after the demonstration, and tomorrow I'm checking out in the C-130. This job lets me use every skill I've ever developed." The final phase of the demonstration was Rodriguez's personal favorite, a scenario where pilots had to adapt to changing mission requirements in real time. The exercise began as a standard reconnaissance mission, then evolved into close air support, then shifted to personnel recovery, requiring the pilots to demonstrate the kind of flexibility that had become the program's signature strength. As the aircraft returned to base and the engines wound down, the international delegation burst into the same kind of enthusiastic applause that the contractors had given 6 months earlier. General Silva was already asking about enrollment procedures and training schedules. "Colonel," said Air Vice Marshal Chen from the Royal Australian Air Force, "we've visited training programs around the world, and nothing comes close to what you've developed here. The integration, the adaptability, the real-world application, this is revolutionary." After the delegation departed, Hendricks and Rodriguez found themselves back beside the A-10 that had started everything. The aircraft looked exactly the same, but its role had evolved from forgotten relic to cornerstone of an innovative training program. "Captain, I've been thinking about that day 6 months ago," Hendricks said. "When I told you any jet will do, I thought I was just trying to be encouraging about aircraft selection. I had no idea I was giving you permission to transform this entire base." Rodriguez laughed, running her hand along the A-10's wing. "Sir, sometimes the best decisions happen when you stop trying to control every variable and trust people to use their judgment. You gave me room to show you what was possible, instead of just what was expected." Hendricks nodded thoughtfully. "I've learned something important from all this. We spend so much time trying to fit people into predetermined roles that we miss opportunities to let them show us what roles they could create. Your A-10 demonstration didn't just save that contractor meeting. It showed me that our assumptions about pilot training were completely wrong." The colonel looked out across the flight line where pilots were conducting post-flight inspections on multiple aircraft types. The diversity that had once seemed chaotic now looked like exactly what military aviation needed: flexibility, expertise, and the ability to adapt to any situation. "Captain Rodriguez, I have one more question for you," Hendricks said with a smile. "If someone asked me today what kind of pilot I needed for an important mission, what should I tell them?" Rodriguez grinned and gave the answer that had become the unofficial motto of their program. "Tell them any pilot will do, sir, as long as you give them the chance to show you what they can really do." As they walked back toward the operations building, both of them knew that those words had transformed not just their careers, but their entire understanding of what military aviation training could become. Sometimes the most important decisions happened when you stopped trying to control everything and trusted people to exceed your expectations.